Namaste, welcome, and thank you for joining our VM Fireside Conversation today. We here at Vichar Manthan look to engage in open conversation to earnestly explore issues facing modern British society through a Hindu civilizational lens. The format of today's Fireside will be a 45-minute conversation, of which 20 to 25 minutes will be a discussion with our speaker, and the 10 to 15 minutes after will be a question and answer. These questions will be coming directly from you, our audience. So if you're tuning in, make sure you drop your questions into our YouTube chat on the right of your screen, and I'll try and ask as many of those questions to our speaker as possible. The topic of discussion today is, will our children be buying eco-friendly homes? Currently, homes account for around 15% of the UK's carbon emissions, with the government's target to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Eco-friendly housing could be a major factor. To explore and unpack this further, we have invited Professor of Architecture and the Built Environment, Guillermo Guzman. Guillermo Guzman de Mont is a Chilean architect with 27 years of experience. He is a researcher at the Creative Energy Homes Project, a full-time assistant professor in architecture at the University of Nottingham, and was the communications director at the Nottingham House Project that represented the UK at the Solar Decathlon Europe competition in June 2010. His current work involves working with students in live projects and promotes innovation in design. Welcome, Guillermo.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Namaste.
Namaste. Nice to have you on. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So let's start with your opening remarks. And for those, can you define what eco-friendly housing is and why it is important in reducing carbon emissions?
Perfect. When you talk about an eco-friendly house, you understand that it reflects onto ecology, into the environment, the planet. So the first element to consider is that it's a house that have low impact on the environment. The largest impacts, as you mentioned, is emission of carbon. And by reducing carbon emissions, you have a much less intense footprint.
Yeah.
A house that have these conditions is normally going to consume less energy, will take advantage of the surrounding energy from the sun, will take advantage of ventilation, will take advantage of daylight, and using safe and sustainable materials will create a context in which the length of the efficiency of the house will be preserved in time, so you don't have to replace or repair. A house that is eco-friendly will have less leaks. It will be airtight, so you will have less heat loss. As you know, the idea is to preserve the heat that is created inside in the winter, and to prevent the heat to come inside in summer. So creating a comfortable balance for the users. So that in a nutshell is what it's all about. Now,
Okay.
The carbon footprint is, of course, something that have a relevance with global warming and the current situation we have. So it's important to address that.
Okay, and housing is a big part of that. Am I correct in saying that? That, for example, in the UK, we said 15%. Would that be about right? Would you say?
I would say it's probably more.
Okay.
I would say that because at some point in the discussions, we were talking about 40% of the energy usage. And if it's about carbon emissions, right, it could be lower, but because industry has a lot share on that, but it's a massive impact. Now, considering the current situation in which we're using our houses much more, and we could end up using them even more, that will contribute enormously. Houses will not be just to come up after 5, 6 o'clock to have a tea and sleep, but it will be a full day occupancy. So that is a matter that makes this topic so relevant.
Yeah, and I guess this COVID situation at the moment is highlighting that for us, in that we're working from home, living at home, spending most of our lives now at home because it's the safest way to live your life. And what kind of things would that have highlighted? And why I say that is because let's get into your project a bit. So you run the Creative Energy Homes project in Nottingham. And as part of that, it's a live-in project. So why don't you tell our audience a bit about that and why it's effective?
Well, this project, we are about 20 members of staff, all researchers and a few architects and many engineers of different specialities. And we've been for the last 20 years testing different methods of construction and ways of design to be more adequate to the UK context. And in that respect, we have there a number of new technologies that were developed 20 years ago that now are in the available for being purchased. So we are very close to industry developing these new materials. We are also very close to users because our houses involve people living there, giving us very important feedback on the impact of this, the handling of these technologies into their daily lives.
Yeah.
And it's really important to see that. So we are getting there. It's a well of data, very good data to inform how should this design be in the future, and of course now, because we're experiencing this on a daily basis. So I'm really happy also because I've been in charge of bringing students into the process, not only to test the houses but to build them.
Wow.
So in their education, the process of handling a hammer and testing the material, knowing what is the life cycle of a material when it comes into the site and then when it could be demolished and recycled, it's really important.
No, that's really interesting. And so this project that you've got going, it not only incorporates the materials used to build these, the cutting edge technology, but you've got people living in these houses. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Every house got a period of time in which they were tested under specific circumstances. Out of the 8 houses, we have 3 in full occupancy of families. There is a 4th one that is becoming a family home. The others are offices. But it's interesting that at the beginning, each house went through the process of testing under specific circumstances. For example, the 1930s house, which was built to the specs of 1930, had a family living there with exactly the conditions of that house. So we did something very interesting with the clothing, with the furniture, with the appliances, and tested during a year, and then make an upgrade to the house to the 1980s building regulations and see how that family changed and how they experienced that. And now we are in the 3rd period, which is the future, the 2050 scenario, and hopefully the house will have to be refurbished to an important degree to match the zero carbon and all the requirements.
And can I ask, what did you notice? So what did you notice going from 1930s to 80s to now?
Well, one detail, I mean, it could be anecdotic, but actually it's not that much. Windows had single glass, and that was the source of heat loss, the major heat loss in a house in the 1930s. So people used a lot of curtains. People were aware of the fact that was where the cold came in. I mean, the cooler part of the house. So furniture was located away from the windows. So when we changed the windows to a double glazing, more efficient, the family naturally went closer to the windows to get daylight. And that is important. That is important because daylight is not an energy you necessarily, well, you don't pay for it. It's free out there. But of course, if a house provides you daylight, you're going to get an element of comfort that is an added value to that efficiency. So that project of the house was thinking on the number of houses in the UK that need that upgrade. There's over, I don't know, a couple of million of houses that need that or could be refurbished or upgraded rather than replaced by a new house. It's much more realistic to think on retrofit than new houses.
And when you say retrofit, you mean that there's existing houses out there that aren't as efficient in terms of the running of the house?
Yes, totally.
And the energy it uses, is that correct?
Exactly.
So from this project that you use, what would you say are the 2 top aspects which improved the energy efficiency of this house?
One, which is the fundamental, I would say, is the thermal insulation, is the addressing of the let's say the leaks, the heat loss of the process, because in nature the temperature balances. So if you have a house that have leaks, it will balance with the temperature outside. So you have to prevent that. And the second is better use of energy. Now, the best energy for, I mean, in our discussions with the researchers, the best energy is the one that you don't use. The second best is the one that you obtain from renewables.
Okay.
So the first point is using less energy. Second, trying to use renewables and sustainable sources of energy. So by getting that balance, if the house contributes with that, then you have a point. But there is a third point that it's worth mentioning, which is the user, the quality, or let's say the awareness of the user in the energy use and in the management of their houses. For example, ventilation is super important to prevent problems with condensation, for example, in windows, in walls, etc. When you use sources of heating that emits humidity, ventilation is an important element. If you don't, particularly if you don't have a controllable element of that in terms of ventilation, you need to be able to open windows and treat that smartly. Otherwise, you're going to have a decay in the materials, a decay in your life, illness, because actually colds and everything comes from that somehow toxic environment that is created inside of the house without ventilation. So the third point I'm mentioning about the user is super important. I stress, I mean, I'm part of that group of researchers that believe the user as the end recipient of this technology and this work has something to say, first of what they want, but also have a mission to comply, to be better users.
Okay, so from what you've just said, I picked three main themes that you raised there, right? One was thermal insulation, which you think is important to retain that heat within a house. The second one is where the energy comes from, and we're talking about renewable energy. And thirdly, the user awareness. So in terms of how they use that space, how they use their windows, how they use their lighting. So let's go a little bit deeper into each of those and see where that takes us, okay? So firstly, thermal insulation. So is this happening in all new houses, firstly? And secondly, how can people do this in their, so retrofitting the houses that already exist?
Right. Well, in the guarantee for that to happen in new houses, it depends a lot on building regulations. The building regulations define the level of heat transference in walls, roofs, windows, etc. So you cannot build a house that have a less efficient system of heat transfer or insulation, and the standards are very high at the moment. The most important part there is the fact that by massifying the use of these materials and these technologies, the costs go low. So the current cost of construction shouldn't be enormous, shouldn't be different to the non-sustainable. First, because the regulations insist on that, and second, for the mass use.
And now, if I can just stop you there, Guillermo. When you say that, so the concept you're coming across with here is that if the mass amount of people or our society take up the use of these materials, the cost of those materials would come down. Is that what you're saying?
It's definitely a point. I mean, it's actually that's why the regulations in a way establish a base point, a bottom line for developers, so they don't go below that. But also importantly, it's also the demand of the users, because if they're going to buy or choose to buy those better houses, there will be more offer. Increasing the demand will create that more offer, because it will be better business. You're going to have empty houses that are not so efficient versus the ones that offer that. And that's where the user, an educated user, will be able to steer that business stream in a better way.
So there's an incentive there for the person buying the house, right? But we know that the building market is controlled by the developers and the people who supply the energy.
Yeah.
right? So where is the, do they have an incentive to build eco homes? Is there an incentive for them?
Not a direct incentive. I mean, they're probably not going to make the save, but they will create. I mean, the incentive is that they're going to be more demand for their product. I mean, they are using now in more and more in the marketing of these new projects, new developments. They're using these concepts of efficiency, energy, energy. I mean, smart use of energy and passive energy, etc. And I think that's super important for the debate, because you don't have to put too much regulations, too much restrictions. You just let the market to flow in front of that demand.
And then, so from what you're saying, it seems to me as though if the society itself decides it wants to buy eco homes, it is inevitable that developers will have to build these for them, because the demand is there. And if majority of people have that, then the cost of these will then come down as well.
Yeah.
And so then I ask you, how can you incentivize a person to buy an eco-friendly home?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, the second part of your question earlier was about what do you do with an old house? Well, and it's important because actually you will get in the history of the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years in the UK, incentives to, for example, the cavity insulation or replacing windows, and the schemes, supporting schemes for loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, changing the windows. So most of the houses now have that. It's a step ahead that makes massive difference. I mean, today it's hard to find a house that still get the single glass old windows. For example, an anecdote, when we built the house of the 1930s and we needed single glass windows, it costed us more to build that special windows with a single glass than to buy the traditional standard UPVC. So that is proof that when you get the massive demand and production, you get the costs low, and you can equalize that into more and more users. And I think that's important. How can you incentivize this? Well, there is an interesting thing that the government have done with the energy performance certificates for homes.
Yeah.
Which originally was for new houses, but now is for every house. So even if you have a 100-year-old house, your house could be tested and could be assessed in terms of the energy consumption and energy efficiency. So you have there an element of selling, which is very strong, or let's say an element of judging when you're buying, so you know what you're buying. You're buying more or less efficiency. So,
so for those people at home who may not have come across an energy performance certificate, it comes in two aspects. So you have the area that tells you how efficient your house is, and the area that tells you what kind of environmental impact your house is. So they can see this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Guillermo, but then they get a report afterwards to say how they can improve their house.
That's the point. That's a very, very important point, because it gives the user a level of power to see, to assess what a house needs in terms of that. And I was going to comment. I mean, it's no longer only the aspect of decoration, and you get a derelicted house that I will make it up. I will earn 50K out of 10K of investment. Fantastic. Today, you can assess the improvement of the boiler, the improvement of the heating system in general, removing all the leaks. I mean, sorting out that air tightness of the house, and you can prove, you have proof to talk to the client, future buyer, or anybody there. So you could get that valuable aspect.
So for someone like that who buys and sells houses, buys a house, does it up, and then sells it again, is there things in place to say I should improve the efficiency of my house? I should improve the emissions that it releases, and will I get more profit from it?
I think today we are in a position that the profit is something visible. It's no longer the romantic aspiration of being more eco-friendly, because that's the reality. I mean, if we're going to make a change in the world, in the environment, yes, we can do it. Everyone could do a little bit, but if that get transferred directly to your pocket, First, as a user, that you pay less energy at the end. So we prevent fuel poverty. But second, as an element of dealing with this and making it a way of improving the whole quality by earning a little bit of money or making that value directly into an economic advantage, I think it's good. It's really good. The point there is that in that aspect, you cannot speculate. I mean, you cannot say this, look at this boiler, it's very good, and you see an old-fashioned one. No, you have elements that prove that things are working properly, and the energy performance certificate is one of those that allows you to prove and be certain that there's not going to be a problem.
Okay, so it seems like we have a way to rate our houses on how good they are for our environment and how eco-friendly they are using this certificate.
Yes, exactly.
But I want to move the conversation on to the second point you mentioned now. So the renewable energy aspect. So what do you mean by renewable energy?
Well, renewable energy is the energy that comes from sources that do not that are not burnable. Let's say the traditional is coal and petrol that you have to diesel that you have to burn to produce energy. The non-renewables are normally finite, that you run out of them, which is what happens now. The renewable sources are coming from the sun, the wind, the waves. They are permanently out there. We need just to harvest them efficiently. Technology has demonstrated in the last 20 years a massive leap, for example, in solar energy in the UK. Photovoltaic panels are exceeding 300% improvement in the quality. At the beginning, it was like almost like nothing. I mean, you had to be in the equator to harvest sun from a photovoltaic. Today, you can get it anywhere in the planet. And that is important, that renewable energy factor.
Okay, so no, that's a really important point. I'm just going to pause us then and just say thank you to the audience for engaging in today's conversation. Let us know about any questions you have for Guillermo. What have you thought about any changes you want to make to your house? Have you made any changes to your house? And how has that affected your saving of energy? Or has it cost you more? We don't know. Give us those questions and I'll try and pose them to Guillermo in a moment. But bringing you back to solar power. So that's what you were talking about when you were talking about the light and the advancement in technology. But we talk about government incentives to try and help along this path to make more eco-friendly homes. They've just stopped the scheme in 2019 for solar panels. And with the research that I did, if I had solar panels put on my house, they're ideally south-facing, so the sun can then access them, so you get the maximum amount of light.
Yeah.
But it says that it would take me 20 to 70 years to then earn back that money. So most people, correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't spend more than 20 years in a house. So how can that work?
Well, that point is a reality that we need to face, and the system should invest on that. I mean, should put some element of support in that, because this idea that when your house is not occupied and the solar panels are producing energy, that energy goes into the grid and the system pays you back, allows the payback period to be reduced. The subsidy that the government started with was not only for installing these panels, but also to run. So they were paying much more money for the kilowatts that you were exporting than the ones that you're consuming. So that reduces the payback period. Unfortunately, it's not sustainable to have it in time for a long time. I think with improvements in technology, that will make it a shorter period. So you will have a better output of electricity. And also, obviously, reducing the consumption of energy in your home will have spare energy. We have some experiments in our project, in the Creative Energy Homes project, in which we have accumulators or batteries, and we have a circuit of houses consuming. So we're trying to be as independent as possible from the grid, not only for energy, like in terms of electricity, but also power, like heat. You could preserve heat. You could share it with more than one house and get that thing going. That is where the let's say, technology and research is moving on to make efficient use of that system. So you could have 8 to 10 or maybe 20. I mean, in Sweden, they've been working with district heating and district power for a long time. So it's really important that we get that thing.
Fine. And so the points I got from you there is, one aspect is we need to try and conserve more heat and energy within our house, and that's by the design of the house, for one example. And the second thing with solar panels, as technology gets better, as mass demand comes down, the cost of these will come down and make them more efficient and allow them to integrate into our houses better.
Yeah.
When you said a word, sustainability, and that brings up a principle in my mind from our community. We believe in a concept called dharma. I don't know if you've heard of dharma before.
Dharma, no.
So dharma is a concept of that which is, or that which sustains. And the concepts of dharma are that you live life in line with the nature laws. So you go on with the environment that you're in, and by going along with those natural laws, you then allow society to flourish. Whereas when you go against those natural laws, society diminishes. So I've looked at your houses, I've looked at how you design them. Tell us how you then take this and allow society to flourish within the homes that you've designed. What are the concepts you take?
That's a beautiful definition. I really will introduce it to my vocabulary, because it's actually the right way of calling it is harmony. When you choose the materials, when local materials are better than the ones that you bring from elsewhere, materials that last longer, they require less effort, less energy to produce them, and so on, and then gets to something that is even more important, which is a happy user.
Okay, so this is onto our third point. This is the third point you're making, right? A happy user and an aware user. So tell me, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, it's connected to this concept of sustainability. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I sort of jump into, because something that is sustainable is not necessarily in terms of quantity, but it's also in terms of quality. So when you get the qualitative aspect of a house like this, you need to understand what is it for how long, and the purpose of it. So a happy user. So when this conversation was started, I always thought eco-friendly. We rather say user-friendly homes.
Okay.
Because if a user is aware of what the context and the reality of energy, the user have the will to save energy and to protect the planet and to be more eco-friendly. So their house is an instrument of that living experience.
Right.
I am convinced that the living experience, not only in a house, but the living experience in an office, in a school, in a hospital, in the streets, in the city, has to be harmonious within not only each other, but with the context.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's why I like so much that definition you gave, because it gets to the spiritual aspect of all these decisions. Because an empowered user is not just somebody that will save money at the end, but will feel that that money is spent on his behalf and his family to achieve an element of happiness, satisfaction, the deserved reward you get every day after working, after being out, to come back home. Now, today with COVID-19 and everything, our houses turn up around and told us how bad they were in terms of that distribution, that things. And some people, and most people very rightfully, are stressed because of that, feeling locked down. And you think your house shouldn't be a lockdown, should be a paradise, should be a cocoon, but it's not. So I have a theory, and I believe this is helping us to be more aware of daylight, of ventilation, of quality of the space, of how comfortable should be our furniture, how efficient should be our tools and things that we use. So maybe less things, but better quality. And I think today it applies much better the concept less is more, in my opinion. I mean, it's something that comes from design, but it's very important.
No, thank you for that, Guillermo. Really interesting point and view on that. And I think that's important going forward. We're moving on to our question and answer period now.
Yeah.
So thank you to our audience for all your questions that you sent through. And we've got a question here from, and let me have a look. 1 second. From Brother Betker, which basically he leads on from your point. He says, what systems of education do you think we need to equip house buyers to drive demand towards eco-friendly construction?
For example, smart meters are a very good way. I mean, they have proved to be super efficient because you're showing the user the curve of consumption. So you know when you turn off lights, you see the impact. That is the best element of education. The worst element of education is restricting, is having super high prices or actually pushing people to feel almost blessed for having energy to spare. Okay. No, as I said, the best energy is the one you don't consume. So if you're rich, you have a lot of money, you still need to save energy for the sake of the planet, for the sake of the system. So that's why it's important to inform people and the smart metering and smart interfaces with control. For example, when you have Alexa or Google or Siri to allow you to turn off lights and turn them up, sensors that check temperature and establish an adequate level of comfortability.
So are you making the point that we need to use technology to help us?
I'm making the point that technology will help educated users. Yes, okay. Of course. I mean, if I'm lazy and I'm going to be in my sofa, laid back, and giving instructions to Alexa, that's not the point. I'm going to be more proactive, for example, in terms of letting that systems do the work for me or support my smart attitude. That's what I'm.
Okay, so it's about making sure that the users of these homes understand the reason behind what the technology is, why it works, and how they can maximize the benefit of it.
Yes, of course.
Okay, no, that's great. Let's move on to the next question. So the next question we've got is, would you say tax breaks would help citizens to acquire sustainable homes?
Totally, yeah, because actually you see the 20% VAT and you see the tax leverage on all sorts of elements. There should be a stimulus from that point of view. So you save. I mean, for example, there are some tax exemptions for medical equipment that people that have chronic diseases will be able to buy, and that is the same here. I mean, this is a health issue. So renewables and energy efficient devices should have that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so would you say this is a drive that needs to come from our government?
Absolutely. I mean, the same way as politically incorrect for some is to say taxing the richer makes more balanced life, but actually it's very politically correct to think that if everybody is aware of this, some people that have spare will be keen on making a sustainable society. So making sure that the next generation of our kids will have access to that, and the following generation as well, not deprive them from this. I mean, today you may say, and some people have told me, and I've read that it's almost like, okay, at least we have a roof over our heads.
Yeah,
and that is okay. That's fine. But why should we reverse so much, or why should it be reversed anyway? So that's important.
Yeah. Okay. So right, I get what you're saying there. And that is a fair point. It's important for us to have these incentives. It's important for the government to then make those changes to make it easier and more accessible for us to then buy these eco homes. Probably the same way they've done with first buyer schemes, right? That made a big difference to help people get on the property ladder. But now people are on the property ladder, it's maybe about looking at how we can incentivize them to buy eco homes.
But of course, absolutely. Maybe the property ladder will create the first buyer, give them incentives or tools to improve that first house. So when they move on in the property ladder, they are getting value out of that. So that they're improving I mean, replacing a door, you say, well, it could be 1,000, 2,000 pounds, but that door could be saving you a couple of £100 a year in the energy bill. So if you think about that balance and that information.
And the important point I think you made there, not only you, but the person that comes and lives after you, right?
Ah, no, absolutely.
It's about
absolutely.
looking after our society. And when you look after our society, you're thinking about the next person, your next child, the next generation that come ahead.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we have to move away from that selfish vision that impairs still there, still now. I mean, I cannot believe that in this potential second wave of COVID, people are again stockpiling because they want to be safe in their own, but they're not worrying about that. That I think is a lesson that we all should learn from this, that the welfare of everyone is our own welfare, because at the end of the day, we're all living in harmony.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very, very pertinent point you've just made. Let's move on to our next question. We'll try and get through a few of these as we can, all right?
Yeah.
So how can we, in the UK, push to CFSH level 5 or even level 6? So by CFSH, it means the Code for Sustainable Homes. So if you could just explain what that means and what the question means, and then answer the question for us.
Well, the Code for Sustainable Homes was created 10 years ago. I understand we made actually one of the projects based on that. I mean, we had a house shared, I mean, a semi-detached, two houses, semi-detached, one Code for Sustainable Homes 2 and one Code 4. And the code, in a way, established strictness in the compliance of these zero carbon elements and the energy efficiency.
So does that mean the better it was at keeping carbon emissions down, or the relative ins and outs of carbon emissions?
Both.
It's a better level.
Well, the higher level is supposed to be a house that is cheaper to run, but it's more expensive to make. Okay. Now, in this experiment, I can talk about that particular experiment. We've seen the impact, and we've talked to the users, and those who lived in the Code 4 house had less daylight coming in because the windows were smaller and there were more obstructions to that connection to the exterior, because it had to be more airtight. And the people living in the house of the Code 2 had more light. They seemed to be happier. Huh?
Okay.
Now, the Code for Sustainable Homes is something that is, I don't think it's that strong anymore in terms of defining those levels. Every year, I mean, when we started this project 20 years ago, we were talking about 20% reduction, then 60% reduction a few years later, now full reduction. The reality is that we need to be realistic in terms of what we can do. For example, the Germans have the concept, the passive house concept. And in the UK, there is an important stream to move that, the passive house group, and it's trying to get the best possible. But in reality, it's hard to imagine in the UK a house fully controlled by a central unit of air treatment that will be fully isolated from the exterior, requiring technical support permanently. So we need to be realistic in terms of what can we really afford.
So what you said there was Germany have this passive house, which looks after itself and is energy sufficient, right?
Yeah.
But it's being practical in the approach in this country to be able to implement that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
In our research, I mean, I'm very good friends with the people, the passionate people that support passive house, and I actually have participated in design competitions with my students, and I have no problem there. But actually, I think there is a balance there in terms of affordability and viability.
Okay.
What is one thing that is interesting regarding viability and affordability is that there is a third point, which is called desirability. And people actually, in my opinion, and in my research and conversations with people want to open a window to hear the birds. Yeah. So that is something passive house doesn't allow you. So there is a factor there in the desirability, which is one of these three legs of the design thinking process. If you remove the desirability, you are speculating too much.
Yeah, and you don't. You want. It comes back to the point you made. You want a user-friendly house. You want somewhere where someone
Absolutely,
wants to live, right?
absolutely. I mean,
So,
yeah,
sorry to cut you short. I want to move. I know we've got
yeah.
there's so much to cover, but let's move on to the next question. And it's a really good question. And it says, how sustainable are the materials that renewable energy drivers are manufactured from? And the second question to this is, can one say that mass manufacturing of the renewable drivers will be economically driven too?
Let me see if I can understand the renewable drivers, meaning.
So how? Let's take the first question. So,
Yeah.
how sustainable are the materials that renewable energy drivers are manufactured from? So the materials and technology used to make renewable energy, the materials used for that, how sustainable are they?
Well, interesting. For example, a photovoltaic is made of silicon, and it's plastic, and it's aluminium, and there is an important carbon footprint of these materials. Now, what is important is the balance between what it costs you to make this, what it takes you to make, and then what is the output of that. I think the offset of these costs in the long term is super important. Now, the second part of the question is this mass construction and industrialization of construction. That is fundamental. I mean, if we can produce as much off-site construction components of houses and even prefabricated elements that could go in and make a diverse approach. I mean, you could have modules and then you group them and create very different situations and houses. One of the projects we made, the Nottingham house, the one that we take to Spain, was 8 modules made of timber that went in the back of 4 lorries and went all the way down to Madrid, participated there, we assembled it with a crane, then came back, and now we have it in the campus, and that's where my office is, and that's where we see students, and those are very efficient. That house is passive house.
So it's looking towards using materials like that to build these houses to get this energy from, right?
Well, exactly.
Okay, I mean, and I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question here before it comes to closing remarks. Okay, and this one asks, the recent Green Homes grant seems to be a silver bullet, giving homeowners a direct incentive to make heat efficiency upgrades. And I believe this refers to the Green Homes grant, which gives you between £5,000 to £10,000, which is 2/3 of the money you might spend, depending on your income, to make your house more efficient.
Yes.
So the person who's at Hirsch who's asked this question would be interested to hear your thoughts on it. So if you can say this in 2 to 3 sentences for me.
Yeah. Okay. Anything helps to make this thing happen. So if you have the third of the cost taken, do it, because it will make an impact in your budget, in your system of working. I think it's necessary. The energy is not going to go down in price; it will go higher, and it will be more scarce. So the more we do now to be self-dependent, self-sufficient, the better.
Okay, so it essentially, any help being given to you and it's something you think worthwhile, take it. It will only make a difference.
Absolutely, it's positive. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So if we can move on to your closing remarks now. I know there's not enough time to cover everything, but let's move on to your closing remarks. And for those, if you can tell us, what sustainable changes does the next 30 years in eco-friendly housing look like, leading up to this 2050 target? And how do you see this happening? Well,
there is an element of uncertainty around us at the moment in terms of development, in terms of the strength of the economy. But one thing that is clear is that we need to live well. We don't need to sacrifice. So the efficiency in using what is available, it's what is the most important. The kids in the future, our children, our next generations are much more aware of that. They feel a bit like harmed by this thing, the lockdown, the constraints and everything, and they will be much more aware of the scarcity of resources, the limit that is on there. There's nothing eternal, nothing limitless. It's something to look after and to take care of. So I think we are. I want to finish this with an optimistic view. because I think from this, let's say, difficult times, we're going to learn how to make the best out of what we have, and not expect too much or in excess from technology, from external resources, from what we don't have. I am a passionate designer, and first of all, I'm a human being, and I love this opportunity to sharing that our experience proved that the more efficient the numbers are, if they're not intended to support people's life and people's well-being, they're nothing. So I think that is what will make the next 30 years worthwhile living and experiencing. And I'm looking forward to see the massification of these technologies, to make them even more affordable, to become something that the user will demand to get lower bills, but at the same time, better quality of life. So when they buy a house, they will find, okay, I have a good garden, I have the chance of expanding. If I'm buying a flat, I have a balcony, so I could come out, even if in a lockdown. You know, all these things come to the discussion, and I think the debate is the most important thing in our society, to be able to be open to debate and to be informed, so the debate is rich.
Okay. No, that is incredible, Guillermo. Thank you for your closing remarks, and thank you for this conversation today. I don't think it's enough time to cover this topic, but I think we've made a good go at it and tried to cover as much as possible. So I'd just like to say thank you again for joining us. The thing that stood out for me was the bit where you talk about synonymity of how we live our lives with our houses, and the importance of bringing our awareness to our house and how we can get the best out of it. So thank you again. I would also like to say a big thank you to our audience for joining at home. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion and taken something to discuss with your family or friends. What are your plans for your house? Do you have any plans for a house? And have you thought about how eco-friendly it is? I implore you to take these discussions into your own homes and see what your friends and family may have to say. I would also like to say a massive thank you to our well-wishers who make events like this possible for us. And if you are interested in Vichar Manthan, or like our well-wishers, want to invest in ideas that matter, please check out our website, vicharmanthan.org. And lots on there, previous Vichar Manthans, book clubs that are ongoing. So please check that out and see what you think. Click the like and subscribe below this video and keep up to date with any other firesides coming up. And finally, that brings me on to, we'll be back here again in 2 weeks' time with our next fireside. Same time, same place. So it'll be the Saturday, 3rd of October, again at 7 p.m. to discuss the roadmap to success. How do we channel our true potential in success? With our expert speaker, Prashanta Singh. This is one not to be missed. So we look forward to seeing as many of you there. Tune in then as you have today. Wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day. Good evening, good night, and namaste.